Hi! If you're new here, all you need to know is that I have watched the first season of the One Piece live-action adaptation, and now, for the first time ever, I am reading the manga, and, more specifically, the first 100 chapters that the live-action has covered so far. With all of that said, let's begin. For this review, I'm combining a few chapters since I read them all together, but I'll still try to go through them mostly in a chronological order. I'll be covering all the remaining chapters from Volume 2, and that is chapters 12 to 17. The first thing I noticed is that while Buggy acts like an arrogant tyrant in both the manga and the live-action, in the manga his crew seems to be a bit closer. In the live-action, Buggy referred to his men as his freaks, giving off this possessive vibe, and it made sense how he ended up alone for the rest of the season. In the trailer for Season 2, we saw the Straw Hats fighting against Buggy's crew, and in the live-action, it's unclear how he gets them back. But in the manga, while his crew still fears Buggy and how unstable he is, they also somehow feel like an actual tight crew that wouldn't completely fall apart after their leader gets defeated. And as a consequence of that, the whole conflict feels less like Luffy versus Buggy and more like Straw Hat Pirates versus Buggy Pirates. Then we get to meet the best, the bravest, the most stubborn and resilient, the most loyal character in this story so far. Someone who fights for the things that matter to them even against absolutely impossible odds. A character who inspired and will continue to inspire generations. And that is CHOUCHOU. I'm serious. I'm jumping ahead a bit to the remaining chapters of Volume 2 because I read them all together, but this dog's story destroyed me. If a random dog made me tear up this early in the story, I worry for my sanity going forward. Honestly, I'm glad this plot point didn't make it into the live action. It would have been difficult to do from a technical side, and I don't think the emotions would have translated all that well. But boy am I glad I'm reading the manga if it means I get to experience stuff like this. But before diving into the heavy stuff, let's go back to a few minor details that stood out to me. I loved how funny CHOUCHOU's introduction was. It created such a good tonal contrast with his heartbreaking story. With how goofy One Piece looks, like the character designs and the world in general, you would normally think it's impossible to do any heavy stuff and make it hit. In fact, one of the reasons why I never got into One Piece up until the live action was precisely that fact that this story's style created an impression as if there would be no real depth to it, or that any attempts to write something emotional wouldn't land. I think one of the main reasons why it does land, quite paradoxically, is precisely this contrast between absolute ridiculousness and deep emotions. Like in this chapter. Here we are, laughing at this funny-looking dog, swallowing a key to Luffy's cage and how everyone reacts to that, and then, out of nowhere, we get slapped in the face with a heartbreak-shaped brick. I think it's pretty brilliant if you ask me. Another small detail I want to mention is that when we saw Boodle, the mayor of Port Town, I assumed he was the dog's owner. First of all, his and the dog's designs are very similar, and there's the whole thing how pets look similar to their owners. Secondly, Boodle sounds like Poodle, so I think it's no surprise that I assumed he was the owner. What I love about this is that it was clearly intentional and not an accidental similarity, because later on we get a scene where the actual owner of the dog tells Boodle that he himself looks like a dog. Once again, I know I'm pointing out ridiculously small details, but every single word or inked line that makes it onto the manga page is intentional, so I feel like if it's there, then I meant to appreciate it, you know? Next, the whole conversation about treasure gets brought up. The mayor says that CHOUCHOU would rather die than abandon his master's store. This ties into the broader themes of One Piece so nicely. First of all, this statement about the dog sounds exactly like what Luffy said about himself, how he'd rather die trying to reach his dreams than not try at all. But what I think is even more important here is the concept of treasure itself. For every single character, treasure means something different, and that really gets emphasized later in this arc. For the dog, it's his master's pet store. For the mayor, it's his town and his people. Someone like Buggy doesn't see it. For him, the only treasure is gold and jewels, but even he adds that treasure is something that makes its possessor a king. So we can draw the conclusion that for Buggy, his real treasure is being, or at least feeling, like someone important, like someone better than everyone else. The most interesting part is that we can look at this problem even more broadly. If One Piece is Gold Roger's treasure, then in order to find out what the One Piece is, we need to know what kind of person Gold Rogers was, and what things were important to him, because his concept of treasure, naturally, won't be the same as anyone else's. Next, I want to talk about a line that stood out to me in chapter 13. The port town mayor asked Luffy why did they even come to this town and picked a fight with Buggy's pirates, to which Luffy answered, "I just figured out why I'm here." I know it's just one short line, but I think it's so important. Luffy first comes to a place and only then figures out why he's there. It's such a nice way to look at life. Instead of forcing things, instead of keeping tight control, you go with the flow and find meaning in whatever happens. This line really reminded me of Avatar: The Last Airbender, actually. If you haven't seen the show yet, please go watch it. It's as close to perfection as you could possibly get. But what I'm trying to say here is that this line from Luffy really reminded me of what Uncle Iroh said in Avatar. Life happens wherever you are, whether you make it or not. The fact that I'm even comparing someone like Luffy to someone like Iroh sounds crazy even to me, and I'm the one who thought of that connection in the first place. Iroh was the wisest character in Avatar, while Luffy seems like an idiot on the surface, but I find that he too has a lot of wisdom, even if it's wrapped in craziness. But, to quote Luffy again, still from the same chapter by the way, crazy is good. Next, we get a brutal fight between CHOUCHOU and the lion, and I absolutely loved how the panels kept switching between the present brutal beating and the flashbacks from the past, all the good days and all the struggles the dog and his owner experienced together. We are literally reading about a dog who can't even speak, and yet this scene speaks so loudly about how important that store is to CHOUCHOU. Then we get the panel of the store on fire. Seeing this panel made my jaw drop. It's so weird how, without the context, this panel wouldn't seem all that impressive. If I saw this panel out of context, it wouldn't even cross my mind that this is some kind of a key moment in the story. And yet, because of everything that's been set up before, this single panel is so impactful. The dog cried, and so did I. The best part is that we can clearly see how affected by this Luffy is, because he understands that dog so much. He went to find Moji and his lion Richie, and here, for the first time in this entire manga, we got a panel where Luffy looked genuinely scary. Once again, I'm going back to my earlier point. The contrast with how cheerful and easygoing Luffy usually is makes this panel stand out even more and creates this deep sense of unease. I, as a reader, simultaneously love seeing this side of Luffy, and yet at the same time feel like I don't want to see an expression like that ever again. I hope what I'm saying here makes sense. What I really like about the structure of this whole plotline is that the emotional intensity never fully drops. You'd normally think that the store getting burnt down and Luffy going to fight Moji would be the resolution, but instead, we jump to a scene where Nami starts picking a fight with Luffy because she really feels for the port town. And Luffy isn't trying to de-escalate the situation at all. It's the opposite. He even tells Nami she doesn't stand a chance against him before ignoring her and going straight to the dog. And here, we get the reveal that he fought against Moji and his lion, all to retrieve a single box of pet food, just a little piece of the dog's treasure. Also, Luffy's smile is back as he compliments the dog for fighting well. I feel like I don't have words that are good enough to express how emotional and touching the scene was. And it's important that Nami sees that. As she kept saying horrible things to Luffy a moment earlier, he didn't need to defend himself in any way or make any promises, because this small gesture for the dog shows exactly how big of a heart Luffy has. I also appreciate that, after seeing this, Nami was quick to apologize for yelling at Luffy. Owning up to your mistakes when you are in the wrong is such a beautiful quality for a character. It's quite a common trope in manga and anime in general to have a character, usually a female character, who just picks fights with everyone for no reason, and it can be an insanely annoying thing if you don't add self-awareness to that character. One Piece is an older manga, so I'm really curious to see how Oda handled writing specifically female characters. But from what I'm seeing so far with Nami, I'm pretty sure everything will be good. The next thing I want to talk about is the differences in how the port town residents were portrayed in the live action compared to the manga. It sounds very rude, but in the Netflix show, those people were pretty much just a background decoration. Based on his appearance, we actually did get to see the mayor Boodle, but in the show he only had one memorable line, and it was asking Luffy if his crew were the town's new captors. In the manga, everything's completely different. The mayor is a much more active player, prepared to fight for his home. The rest of the townspeople also feel like a real community. We didn't get a lot, but the things we got had key importance. First, we saw the story how the people built this town from nothing and, over time, made it thrive. And, secondly, we saw how much the people care about each other. The same thing happened back in Chapter 7 with all the nameless Marines. And in Chapter 14, once again, even the background characters are written in a way where they feel important and not just there to fill the page. After the mayor declares he'll fight and Luffy tells Nami he'll help, Nami finally agrees to join Luffy, but she emphasizes that she still won't become a pirate. In the live action, I feel like the transition between her saying she won't be a pirate and her being okay with calling herself one of the Straw Hat Pirates was pretty soft. If I had to guess, I think that in the manga, that change won't be as soft. My theory is that she'll continue refusing to be called one of the pirates up until Arlong comes into the story. And if this theory is correct, I'm excited to see the exact moment the switch happens. After that, we get into the main action sequence of this part in the story. I'll be honest, I didn't really care much about Moji or Kabaji. I feel like, just like Moji and his lion were there to be an obstacle that highlighted CHOUCHOU's story, in the same way Kabaji was there to highlight the kind of fighter that Zoro is. And we sure got to see a lot. If I had to describe the live-action version of Zoro, one of the first words that comes to my mind is dramatic. In the show, that boy was always so extra about everything, which was a very endearing quality. I am glad to see that in the manga, not only is this quality still present, but it's even more pronounced. Zoro was already injured and repeatedly getting kicked in that spot by Kabaji, and his answer to that was cutting himself even more and asking his opponent if that was enough of a handicap for them. Zoro is a drama queen in the best way possible. Obviously, this whole thing has deeper layer and ties to Zoro's pride. From the live action, I already know that Zoro, as good as he is only a big fish in a small pond, and his pride will get completely shattered once he gets destroyed by Mihawk. But the manga is not there yet, so currently, Zoro seems almost inhuman. Just in the previous chapter, the house where he was sleeping was destroyed by a cannon, and Zoro's only response to that was complaining about this unpleasant alarm clock. I know this is not normal, not just by real-world standards, but also within the One Piece universe, given that Nami and the mayor also noted that he shouldn't have even survived that. We keep seeing examples of Zoro's insane physical strength and durability, so I am wondering if that's just how it is, or is there a bigger reason, like him actually possessing some kind of special powers? As always, don't answer that, because the story itself will reveal it in time. While I'm still on the topic of Zoro, I have to talk about how he called out his final attack against Kabaji. First of all, that's not something he does in the live action, at least not yet, so I was a bit surprised by the fact. But, more importantly, the name stood out to me. He called his attack Onigiri, which is translated as Demon Slash. But from my very limited understanding of Japanese, I am pretty sure that's also a pun, and onigiri can be translated as rice ball. This could be just a one-time thing and a callback to the time when that little girl made and offered him rice balls, but I think it would be fun if that becomes a pattern and all Zoro's attacks are named weirdly like that. I guess I'll have to wait until a different fight to find that out. Also, it seems that Zoro latched onto the idea of calling himself a pirate really quickly. I feel like he probably simply really likes having a friend like Luffy, and not having to do all the things on his own anymore. Finally, Volume 2 ends with Buggy mentioning Shanks. Once again, since I've seen the live action, I already know these two have a past and used to be a part of the same crew, so the reveal isn't surprising to me. I am mostly just curious how much of that past will be mentioned here compared to the live action. Also, in the live action, the fight against Buggy was a group effort, but in the manga, Nami's doing her own thing, Zoro is already out after his own fight, which only leaves us Luffy. I imagine that because of that, the resolution to this fight will also be different than it was in the live action, so I'm excited to see how everything plays out. But these are questions for future volumes. For now, that's all from me and my thoughts on the ending of Volume 2. Thank you all for listening. Please share your own thoughts in the comments, and if you're interested, I'll see you in the next part as I review Volume 3.